We've got Mr. Johnathon Justus coming up here with us, and Johnathon has been in every magazine you can imagine. He's been, I'm serious, literally, he is a top chef. He was in France for 3 decades, and he has been at 3 restaurants, I think there, is that correct, in France? Okay, very good. He's kind of modest about what he does. When I called him about coming up here to this meeting, he was actually out collecting pawpaws. And he had already gotten, I guess it was spice bush berries for other recipes. And he has a restaurant now in downtown Kansas City called Black Dirt Restaurant. And literally, there's not a magazine out there. U.S. News and World Report, New York Times, LA newspapers. He's been in all of them. And he's, the last show that you were on, what was the name of it again?
Well, that was just on the Food Network a few weeks ago, but recently was with Andrew Zimmer on the Travel Channel, where I prepared a groundhog for him.
Very good. And I don't remember who, and I got to see that one too. I was trying to think of the guy's name. So he is the go-to person we've decided to send Chinquapin nuts to, and Chris and Sean and Doug sent him several pounds. And I think he's going to tell you a little bit more about that and what he's been doing, and what he's going to do with this food that's making a return. And I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much. Give him a good warm applause.
Thanks, Steve. I came to cooking a little bit late in life. I grew up in a small town north of Kansas City called Smithville. And when I was a kid, I really loved the times that my dad, my brother, and I would go out and hunt morels. And I didn't really know anything about wild foods, and I knew the morels were out there. Years later, after going to design school in LA, and then repossessing cars in San Francisco, and then 15 years as a bicycle messenger in that city, in the middle of it, my wife and I moved to the south of France, and there was a couple of things that happened there. One, I remember I was afraid we were going to run out of money, and I took a job under the table in this kitchen, and these morels came in, and I didn't know morels grew anywhere other than, in the Midwest, in Missouri. And this French chef who I was working for, I was what the French call a plongeur, which is exactly how it sounds. It's the bottom of the kitchen. And these morels came in, and I looked at him and I said, "Oh, you have morels?" And he goes, "Oh, you know that Olive?" He said, "Oh, you're from you prepare these." And I said, "Well, sometimes we do them in cracker crumbs, sometimes in batter, sometimes just flour, egg wash, and batter." He goes, "Oh, you're the knackers, you crazy, you fry everything." I didn't know you could make really beautiful sauces with morels, or just saute them and have them be lovely. And about that time, my wife and I, Camille was over here, I always was into cycling, and we were taking a 10-day trip through Provence, and we were outside this town called Le Beau de Provence, and I was riding along, and this old woman pops out of the woods right next to me and scared the crap out of me. And she has this basket. I kind of swerved away, and I saw a look on her face, and she saw me, and we went on. And the next morning, and we camped out that night. We went into town and to the farmer's market, and she had all of these things in front of her that she'd collected out of the woods. And it was the first time in my life I'd ever really thought of foraging, and the idea really got under my skin. And when we were in France, we came back and went back to San Francisco. Actually went to France as a painter and came back as a cook. And in San Francisco, I eventually became an executive chef, and then we moved to Paris, and then back to the south of France. And the second time we were there, we probably overstayed our welcome a little bit. The owner of the restaurant where I was the executive chef, and where we lived above the restaurant, was right on the beach in a city called Le Grand Mât on the Mediterranean. Crystal blue water. It's just awful. Anyway, we were talking about coming back. Well, we were talking about coming back because the owner of the restaurant had gone around town and told everyone that we were political refugees from the United States, and he thought it was funny. and everyone knew that we were illegal, and the local head of the gendarme, which is like the chief of police on his national group, and the chief called us into his office and said that other restaurants thought it was funny that we were there until we started putting a dent in their business because they thought the American chef was going to run this guy out of business, and no one liked the owner of the restaurant. So we were trying to figure out what we were going to do when we were coming back to the States, and we were talking about maybe moving up to Quebec, where there's this very strong culture of foraging and culture of what's in the woods. And we passed through Smithville, where I grew up, because my parents were older. My dad had been born in 1920 and my mother in 1922, and I was born in 65, so it was later in their life when I was born. And when we got back, my mother had retired as a pharmacist, and there was the family drugstore, and I have 6 siblings. I even have a little sister. That was a 25-year span, by the way, between my youngest and my oldest sibling from the same parents. Consider having children in grade school and or high school for 38 years. Anyway, so my mother retired, and my little sister and my mother said, oh, you and Camille, instead of moving to Montreal, you should put a restaurant in the drugstore. Now, I had been an executive chef in the south of France, I had worked in Paris, had been an executive chef in San Francisco, and they were positing to me that it would be a great idea to open a restaurant in the little hometown where I grew up. I thought that was a less than brilliant idea. And Camille's the one that kind of talked me into it. And we started talking about what the possibilities were. We started talking about the proximity of agricultural infrastructure. I mean, there were certain things I was going to need because I don't work with commodity products. I work with farmers. And we wanted to use whole animals. I had learned butchery. I worked for a place in San Francisco where we had a harvest facility where we had a kill floor, and we aged all the way down to individual cuts. And I knew we wanted to do all of our own baking. We wanted to do everything from scratch. And I thought about no one, it seemed to me, in that area north of here, other than maybe survivalists or some hippies, had really thought about wild foraged foods, and definitely hadn't thought about them from the point of view of a chef. And that really attracted me, and that's why we ended up opening Justus Drugstore. And we were doing something really different. I remember telling someone, like, they said, well, what are you going to do for seafood? And I said, well, I'm not going to do any seafood. Like, you can't open a restaurant around here and not have a crab cake. I said, well, yeah, you can. And I said, you know, what does salmon or oysters or mussels or tuna say about this region? It doesn't say anything about here. Barbecue, smoked, beef, pork, chicken, lamb, even goats, even rabbit. What about quail, groundhog, and things that people ate here 100 years ago? And that food culture is disappearing. And the food culture is disappearing down here. And I took it upon myself to open a restaurant where I was trying to celebrate something more than just, this is food that I'm presenting. This is what we have here. When I do a dish, what does it say about who we are culturally? What does it say about where we live geographically? And this is very important to me. And so that meant at the drugstore, in 12 years, no seafood was ever served there. A lot of fish, a lot of river fish. Sturgeon, bass, soft-shell crawdads. You guys ever had soft-shell crawdads? They're amazing. Yeah, they're like, I mean, they're better than soft-shell crab, and they're crazy expensive. But they're, I wanted to do food that was also going to support a local economy. And when I started thinking about what was out in the woods and how many jobs now that we provided for people that have gone out and foraged product and giving a reason to have the woods as an economic interest. And I thought about this with the rivers also. Missouri's got some of the dirtiest rivers in this country. And economically the fighting interest of manufacturing and big agriculture, because there's no economic impetus in having clean water. I guess our health is apparently not enough. But I always thought if we were pulling river fish out and we were using the river fish as an economic engine, you stand a chance of going up against the other interests to have an impetus to have clean water. And this now goes into, say, like the Chinquapins or the other forageables that are out there. If you have an economic interest in having healthy woods, you have a much better chance at developing those healthy woods than if you don't have an economic interest, because people will say, oh, why do we need whales? We don't need whales. I don't need whale. Well, why do we need turtles? Rainforest? I don't live there. I don't care. But if you have at your doorstep an economic engine, so you can't take my woods down. We make a living out there. And this is, I think, part of a bigger picture of where, by the way, the last time I spoke down here, I made the mistake of saying, Steve, you've been saying Chinquapin. I said Chinquapin to someone the first time at Hobbs. I got chastised for not saying Chinquapin. And so I don't know, what is, do I say Chinquapin or Chinquapin? Or does it depend who I'm speaking to?
Regionalism.
It's regionalism. Missouri, Missouri. All right.
Yeah, there you go.
So those are my thoughts on why, or one of the reasons why. I mean, it's multi-layered and multifaceted on the reasons that the Chinquapins are important. Biodiversity, economics. Biodiversity is not just the plant itself. We've already talked about this, of the animals in the woods. And even when I'm foraging, it's very important to me that I don't clear ever anything of an area. If I'm hunting morels, I always leave some behind. If I'm hunting pawpaws, if I'm going out for whatever it is, we always leave some behind. We also have at our house, although it's taken some damage because the groundhogs we have a little 117-year-old home, and it's tiny, 700 square feet, and it had I call it a stone foundation. My father-in-law, who's an architect, says, no, that's a rubble foundation. It's just stones from the area that were packed with mortar, and the groundhogs had burrowed in and around it and actually made our basement part of their den network. Oh, here's something, by the way. I don't know if you guys know this, but I suspected it after a couple of years and then found out it's factual. That did you know that skunks will go into groundhog dens in the spring and try to spray them out to take their dens over? I know this because our basement was part of the den. Which meant that when I opened the door after work, coming home from the restaurant at 1 o'clock in the morning, it was so bad my eyes burned and started tearing that I was literally crying. It was awful. About a week every spring, maybe 2. But anyway, so I digress. Groundhogs are valuable also. There's I do digress. I have the worst ADD. I had a thought there of the economic impetus. Where was I going with that? This happens to me often enough that I'm no longer embarrassed by it. This,
Economic driver.
yeah, as an economic driver, but oh, yes, there we go. So my intention with the nuts that are being sent to us is to find viable economic manifestations for them, to find things that people are going to want to buy. And there are certain things that came up immediately. I thought about, I don't know if anyone, there's a lot of granola type bars out there, and they're all natural, and I was thinking about, is anyone doing, say, an absolutely like wild, forageable, like energy or granola bar? And I've never seen one. I've seen even things like black walnuts. I mean, there's a couple of breweries around that are using black walnut as a flavoring agent for beers and ales. I was thinking about that. There's the obvious. There's like using them just like you would a chestnut. But where do you go when you go beyond that obvious? And what do you find? And what do you find if we're going to get the trees and get them back and have an economically viable product, we're going to have to develop markets for people who want to have that product, if that is the point. I mean, we can spread them around the woods, and that's good also, but I look around this area and I think that there's definitely more economic engine could be used here. And then I was also thinking of something a little bit before this, the lost culture here, that, you know, a common thread of what everyone's been talking about has been my grandfather used to talk about, or, you know, that no one thought that these were here anymore. And when we were coming down on this trip, in the past, I've been down to this area a few times, and I naively, not naively, maybe stupidly, I thought, oh, I asked around, so is there a chef-driven restaurant around here somewhere I can go to see what someone around here is doing? And I felt I'm asking the wrong question. What I should be asking, is there anyone around that is using products at hand and doing real Ozark food with it? And I only, we were in contact how long ago? Maybe 3 weeks ago? In 3 weeks of doing a lot of internet searching, you can't find anybody. I mean, so that there's, beyond the genetics, beyond the economic engine, there's also, within this, there's the culture that's being lost. And the Chinquapins are part of a larger loss of that culture. And bringing them back, maybe, again, especially in promoting them, and getting chefs or other people to start thinking about other traditions and food traditions of this way. In the South, there's the Southern Food Waste Alliance that has done amazing work to preserve Southern food and just canning and jarring, and things like canning and jarring recipes, which are going to be lost. I'm hoping that maybe even just talking about this and talking with a few people about this, that I kind of get this idea in people's ear to ask those questions. Is anyone doing this? Does anyone want to do this? Do you know anyone that wants to do this, that is trying to make this part of a bigger picture of, you know, a lost culture? So I think that's kind of the things I wanted to talk about. I hope I wasn't too discombobulated. So I don't know if I guess I did get through this, that I do go out in the woods. I do forage a lot. We have a property, that's where I digressed, a property at our house where we have been for almost 10 years trying to take wild, mainly native plants and develop cultivars. We have we've had a full-time botanist that was working for us and an environmental scientist for a long time. Our botanist is working on his dissertation now, so we've lost him while he's trying to fully advance his, to finish off his doctorate. But things like lamb's quarters, which are really, really tasty, but really, really gangly. And if you want to get something that's going to grow that you can harvest from that, we've looked for genetic anomalies like a compact plant that has a higher yield, or pennycress, which is really bitter, and you find there's a genetic anomaly out in pennycress, and you go and you taste it, and it's nutty instead of bitter. And if you look at, now I'm really going back, as humans, when we went from hunter-gatherer to agrarian, we were planting, when we started planting foods, we planted them for flavor, medicinal purposes, preservative. I always forget one, and it's always a different one. Flavor, preservative, medicinal. Nutrition, thank you. That's it. It was someone to help me. So when we planted these things in rows, and like, let's say you're going for flavor, it's like, oh, it's bitter, it's bitter. Oh, this one's tasty, we're going to plant these seeds. And we're not, you know, there was nothing, it was just selective breeding, obviously. So we're trying that on things like pennycress. You take pennycress, and it's generally bitter, and you go down and you plant a row of it. And I thought, oh, we found, like, you know, the genetic anomaly, and I want to plant this. We're going to have like rows of nutty pennycress. This is going to be great. And it doesn't happen that way. So you go down and you go bitter, 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 nutty, bitter, 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 nutty. You find a higher percentage than you do in the wild, but it's by far from getting it 100%. Then you do it over and over and over again. And we're about 75% nutty. And we'll never get beyond that because there's enough cross-pollination out in the woods that's what we're going to end up with. But that goes into, I guess I'm trying to qualify myself on why I'm involved here, and hopefully to help bring the Chinquapins not just as the economic engine, but also to get word out with contacts, as I work with media a lot, and I have been written about a lot on a national level. So I am really honored to have been invited down here, and I hope I haven't put anyone to sleep. I know that it's cold enough in here that it should be keeping everyone slightly awake. Well, there was one other thing I was thinking about the hogs, the wild pigs. I just read something last week, this is totally off, but I wanted to raise my hand earlier, that they've just discovered recently wild hogs using tools, which is a big jump. And they found that there were wild hogs that were taking rocks and pushing rocks up against electric fences. And if the rock clicked, they knew the fence was electric and wouldn't cross it, which is amazing. This is like this is like a dog taking a stick and opening a door, you know. But anyway, they are smart and they are going to be formidable and they're going to give you trouble always.
Got a question over here?
Yes, sir.
Yes. What is your favorite way to prepare groundhog? I'm sincerely interested.
First of all, like other wild game, they do have glands. You want to pull the glands out from under the arms, and then around the pelvic. The red meat, they're really amazingly, pretty much. I mean, they carry very little in the way of parasites. They're a very clean animal. Extremely rare for them to have rabies. When the television show came, they contacted me because I'm known for doing food that's about a specific place, and Andrew Zimmern has his Bizarre Foods, and he's got this new show he calls Bizarre Foods America, which is not about bizarre foods at all, really. It's about chefs around North America that are doing foods that are very much about a particular place. And I talked to him about this, and I said, why do you call it Bizarre Foods America? And he says, well, I don't own it, and I can't go around the world eating weird crap for the rest of my life because people are getting tired of it. And I pitched it to the Travel Channel. Let's do this show where I go out and I find chefs that are doing things that are very region-specific. I am going to give you an answer, by the way. And they said, oh, great, we'll call it Wild Foods, we'll call it Bizarre Foods America. And he goes, no, it's not about bizarre foods. Like, we own the show, we're going to call it Bizarre Foods America, or we can find someone else to do it. So, when they were doing the research, they found the first brick-and-mortar barbecue restaurant in Kansas City came from a guy named Henry Perry, who had made his name as, he was born a slave, and the inauguration of the Hannibal Bridge in Kansas City did a great big barbecue, and he was the pit master and served over 30,000 people. And he opened a barbecue restaurant around the turn of the century, 1900 in Kansas City, and we found a menu, and on that menu was mutton, not lamb, it was mutton and beef and pork, raccoon, possum, and groundhog. And that was what was on the menu. And groundhog is a red meat. By the way, out of that restaurant, 2 Kansas City famous restaurants were born. The originator of Gates and the original Arthur Bryant's had both worked for this guy, and then opened what are now still 2 of the most famous barbecue places in Kansas City. So I did it on rotisserie. I cooked it slow. I kept it pink, kept it like medium. It's pretty lean. It tastes like, I just had a big discussion with Steve last night about grass-fed beef. And so I'd say it tastes like grass-fed beef, but that's a misnomer because grass-fed can mean a lot of different things depending on what part of the world you're in. But it's pretty delicious. It really is. And I feel if you're going to, we had to trap them because of our property, and they were eating us out of house and home. If I'm going to kill an animal, and I need to save for the economic viability of our property and it's edible, I'm going to eat it because a life has been given.
For what it's worth, my opinion is that Brown hog tastes like a really big squirrel. Some of that might relate to some of you in the room. But I'm no chef like you are, and I don't have that palate.
I've had a lot of squirrel. I think ground hog is, I don't know.
How did you season it?
Real simply, just like you would a steak, because it very much tasted like steaks. I mean, squirrel's a little greasier to me, and I did a long time ago, I did a game meal, because I'm known for doing these. I did a little amuse-bouche, a little tiny pastry pot pie of squirrel and morel pot pie, but to get the squirrel to taste like I wanted it, in that manner, I cooked it in changes of chicken stock. And kept changing out the chicken stock to get it down to where finally the flavor of the squirrel ended up being about the flavor of dark beef turkey, you know, the oyster is on the back. It's a little bit darker tasting, and I don't think I've ever cooked squirrel medium rare because they carry a lot. I mean, in the way of things that I'm afraid of.
John, from your perspective, describe Chinquapin as though these people have never tasted.
Oh, wait, okay, the question was describe the Chinquapin. There's a lot of variation. There's a lot of variation nut to nut, which is fine. I love pawpaws, and the variation of pawpaws are crazy. The genetics in the pawpaw seeds are, you plant the seed and you don't get the genetics necessarily of the fruit that you planted. And but they can go from like really sweet and that kind of almost like caramely, and they can also be I think like where it's more like toasted flour and like nuttiness you get from toasted flour. Like, I don't know if anyone's ever dry roasted like flour in a pan and just browned it without any fat or anything to do it in a heavy cast iron. And I think that hazelnut gets that flavor, but more in the raw state. Now, I did have something, I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to ask, who here has cooked with Chinquapins? Wow, okay. Just the two, all right. I was hoping, because as we've been playing with them, I've been trying different ways to get them open, because they're, you know, for me, having a business, getting them open one by one is, I can't sell them to a customer in any kind of economically viable way without my customer thinking that I am raking them over the coals if I can't find a way to open them. We've been just taking them and I put them on a sheet tray, and then we lay them out, and then we put a baking resting rack that's on a grid, it's like a 1/4-inch grid over the top of it, and I put them in a 500-degree convection oven with the fan on high, and in 7 minutes, it tends to be perfect. At 5 minutes, not all of them have opened. In 10 minutes, you're going to burn them. It's great, and I love that they open up and they're very easy to get out. But when you hand peel them, it's a completely different flavor. And so I'm looking for ways. I was hoping maybe someone here might have other ways. Someone did mention, I think, was it Steve, that you mentioned that soaking them in water and then letting them swell. And then
old Indian method that I stumbled on. Early Explorer described that. They were doing that.
So if anyone does come across ways, I would like to know, because I'm looking for different manners. You know, we just got these. I'm planning on putting some in the dehydrator also, and seeing if I can get them to split as they dry. But I need to find ways that we can get a lot of them without a lot of work. I have a question: the burrs. How difficult are the burrs to get off? How much? I mean, there's.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Since we got a microphone.
Well, that's a good one. You can talk to Chris or Sean or Doug or me or AJ or Sam that has to dig them out. It can be a lot of work. Here's what happens. On the tree itself, the burrs actually open up, or historically they did, and the nuts would fall. People would scoop them up and eat them. Wildlife would get them. Now, though, the nuts are so rare, if you wait till that point when they open completely up and fall on the ground, you're not going to get any nuts. It's like collecting any kind of wild food. You've got to beat the wildlife to it, be able to get them. So to answer your question, if you can catch them when the burr is opened up, the spiky burr, You can use a handle spoon, a little screwdriver, anything like that. You can pop them out real easily, and they're good and viable then and good to eat. But if you pick them green, or that they have not started opening up at, it is a huge, huge job, and they're immature. They haven't done their thing yet. So, to answer your question, you need gloves to do this. It's not something I would take on very easily. And I've been showing so many Chinquapins here lately. I'm sure Chris and Sean and the rest of them will tell this too. There's what I call the Chinquapin hop. It's because you get a little needle-like burr in one of your toes because you're walking barefoot. And so, and then the missus doesn't like that too good sometimes. But yeah, so the burr itself, historically they would wait. If you hit dry spells like what we had recently, about 5 or 6 weeks without rain, when you get a lot of wind, it will knock the whole burr off sometimes before it drops all the nuts out of it. So it depends some on weather. Ideally, if the weather's right, they'll open up and they'll drop on your own, and you just pick up and collect the nuts. But if it's real dry, they will begin to abort that big burr, and then you have to dig them out of the burr. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So 4 or 5 years ago, I spoke down at Hobbs State Park, and Steve sent me some Chinquapins back then, and we did a little kind of a Butterfinger bar out of it with the center was that kind of wafery, crispy, that was made with the chestnut, the Chinquapins, and then coated in chocolate. And this time they just sent me a bunch, and we were working with them, but they didn't before, they sent me some that was still in the burr. And I'm glad you did, because I immediately looked at those and I had a completely different perspective on how important it was for me to respect every single individual nut, because I was just thankful I was the one having to pull them out of the burr. But, so I did bring a little snack. We were hoping to have a little bit more time to put something together. We just got these. I had just a few days to work on them, but I had collected some spice bush berries and have some persimmon seeds. Persimmon seeds, the settlers would grind into a coffee substitute, and it's a really good spice. One of my favorite things I'd ever had was suckling kid, Racco suckling kid with salt and ground persimmon seed on it. The persimmon seeds have a flavor that runs along coffee, the vanilla, and tropical fruit flavors. But I brought some pawpaw, kind of a pound cake, with scented with persimmon seed and allspice, and it's studded with Chinquapins. And we also brought just some roasted Chinquapins that we're going to sprinkle over the top of it with a little a toffee caramel to pour over it. So that's a little dessert with lunch. So don't fill up completely on all of the sweets on that table over there.